The judge fainted when she saw the necklace the prisoner was wearing, the same one her daughter was wearing when she disappeared 12 years ago. The courtroom was crowded. The muffled sound of murmurs echoed off the walls, reflecting the tension that filled the air. On the defendant's bench, Philip Matthews sat with a serene expression, but his eyes betrayed the unease he felt. He wore a worn-out suit that had clearly seen better days, and a necklace hung around his neck. A simple piece, but one that carried a deep and still unknown meaning to everyone in that room, except for one person. Judge Mary dos Santos entered the courtroom with firm steps, her imposing posture reflecting decades of experience in the judiciary. However, that day there was a shadow in her eyes, an invisible weight she could not shake off. As she sat down, her eyes fell on Philip, and then she saw it, the necklace. Mary felt her heart stop for a moment. It was impossible. The necklace Philip wore was identical to the one her daughter Louise had been wearing the day she disappeared 12 years ago. She tried to maintain her composure, but the tremor in her hands revealed the turmoil forming within her. While the prosecutor began his opening argument, Mary couldn't take her eyes off the necklace. The memory of Louise with that necklace, smiling as if the world were full of possibilities, returned to her mind with overwhelming force. The prosecutor's words became a distant buzz. Mary struggled against the dizziness, but the image of the necklace pulled her into an abyss of memories and regrets. Her thoughts raced, connecting dots that had once seemed disjointed. How did Philip have that necklace? Was he really involved in Louise's disappearance? The thought that this man might have taken her daughter from her made her stomach turn. She tried to take a deep breath, but the air seemed thin. The walls of the courtroom were closing in around her, her vision growing blurry. Then, without warning, Mary collapsed. The courtroom descended into chaos. Shouts of surprise echoed. Lawyers and security guards rushed to help her. Philip watched with wide eyes, confused and alarmed. The trial was immediately postponed, and Mary was rushed to the hospital. Philip was escorted back to his cell, not fully understanding what had just happened. To him, the necklace had always been a symbol of friendship, something he had kept with care, and that connected him to a past that now seemed distant and tainted by unjust accusations. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Mary slowly regained consciousness, her face pale and her eyes wide. She knew that necklace was the key to the truth she had been searching for years. Doubt gnawed at her mind. Was Philip guilty, or was the necklace a sign of something much deeper and more complex? The case took on a new dimension. Investigator Simon Reynolds, a police veteran known for his sharpness and persistence, was assigned to investigate the origin of the necklace. Simon always had a keen sense for mysteries that defied common logic, and he knew something wasn't right. He began tracing the necklace's origins, aware that this seemingly insignificant piece could unravel a tangle of secrets that many would prefer to keep buried. The necklace was not just a piece of jewelry, it was a lost link between Mary's painful past and Philip's chaotic present. And so Simon began his investigation, determined to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, questions continued to hammer at Mary's mind. What was Philip's real connection to Louise? And more importantly, was she finally about to find out what happened to her daughter all those years ago? Simon Reynolds' office was covered in papers and files, reflecting the intensity with which the investigator had plunged into the case since the day Judge Mary had fainted in court. The necklace, now carefully stored in an evidence bag on his desk, seemed to glow under the cold office light, as if it carried with it an untold story, a long-buried secret. Simon was meticulous, a man who preferred facts over assumptions, and his experience had taught him that often the most insignificant details were the ones that led to the truth. He began his investigation by tracing the origin of the necklace, contacting jewelers, and reviewing old sales records. After days of exhaustive research, he found what he was looking for. The necklace was a unique piece made to order 12 years ago, precisely at the time of Louise's disappearance. It had been sold to an anonymous customer, a man who paid in cash and disappeared without a trace. This discovery only deepened the mystery. Simon knew he needed answers, and Philip was the key to getting them. In the interrogation room, the atmosphere was tense. Philip maintained a calm expression, but there was an air of weariness about him. He had been imprisoned for years, always insisting on his innocence, and now seemed on the verge of a nervous breakdown. "Philip, let's get straight to the point," said Simon, throwing the bag with the necklace on the table between them. "This necklace was custom-made, a unique piece. Who gave it to you?" Philip looked at the necklace and then at Simon, his eyes showing a glimmer of pain and resistance. "It was a gift," he said calmly, "from friends. That's all I can say." "Friends? Who are they? You need to help us, Philip. If these friends are innocent, as you say, why hide them?" Simon pressed, his voice hard but patient. Philip shook his head, keeping his gaze fixed on Simon. "I can't say. They have nothing to do with this. And I have nothing to do with what happened to Louise. I swear." Simon sighed, frustrated by Philip's lack of cooperation. The refusal to reveal the names only heightened suspicions. With no more answers, he decided to change tactics. Back in his office, Simon began digging deeper into Philip's past. He revisited old missing persons files, trying to find connections that could link Philip or his mysterious friends to Louise's case. As the sleepless nights passed, Simon found a disturbing pattern. Several unresolved disappearances had a thread connecting them to Philip, directly or indirectly. Most of the cases involved young women who had vanished under mysterious circumstances, and in at least 2 of them, Philip's name had appeared in statements, albeit tangentially. Simon also began finding signs of corruption within the police force. Reports that should have been filed were missing, and important documents seemed to have been altered or removed. It was as if someone were actively trying to erase the past and redirect the investigation away from the truth. Suspicions of a conspiracy began to grow. He knew there were forces working to prevent the case from being solved, and that Philip, somehow, was just a piece in a much larger game. The investigator then decided to confront his own colleagues, aware that his quest for justice might pit him against those who were supposed to be on his side. A tense conversation with a superior warned him that he was treading where he shouldn't. "Let it go, Simon. The case is already complicated enough," was the veiled warning, but Simon knew how to read between the lines. He was starting to mess with people who had much to lose if the truth came out. Simon was not the type of man who gave up easily. With each piece he found, his determination grew. The truth about the necklace and its connection to the old disappearances suggested that Philip could be both a victim and an unwitting accomplice to something much darker. He made a promise to himself. He would find out what really happened to Louise and clear Philip's name if he were truly innocent. But to do so, he would have to look beyond appearances and be prepared to face not just criminals, but also those who, in theory, should have been on his side. Simon, back in his office, surrounded by files and evidence, held the necklace and examined it once more, convinced that this small object was the key to a larger puzzle. He picked up the phone and made a call to an old contact, someone outside the reach of corrupt cops, determined to dig even deeper and expose the web of lies that had remained hidden for so long. Simon knew he was about to unearth something big, something that could forever change the fate of everyone involved. The darkness of the past was about to be revealed, and Simon was ready to face whatever came his way, even if it meant challenging the system and putting his own career at risk. Simon Reynolds sat in his office, surrounded by an avalanche of documents and old files. The investigation into the necklace had taken him down an unexpected path, revealing more than just a simple disappearance case. There was something bigger at play, and the name that kept appearing almost like a ghost on every page was that of the Sentinels. The Sentinels were mentioned in whispers, a name that echoed through the corridors of crime like a closely guarded secret. Simon quickly realized that the organization operated in the shadows, with an invisible and highly organized structure. What had once seemed like just a series of isolated disappearance cases began to transform into a clear and disturbing pattern. As he dug deeper, Simon discovered that the Sentinels were known for their involvement in disappearances, but their connections with high-ranking figures and legitimate businesses made the organization almost untouchable. Simon revisited old reports of unsolved cases where the Sentinels' modus operandi began to appear more clearly. People disappeared without a trace, and those who tried to get close to the truth were discouraged from continuing. As Simon pieced together the puzzle, it became evident that the Sentinels' network of influence was deep and complex. In conversations with informants and colleagues, he heard reports of bribes, threats, and even police officers who had been bought off to cover up the organization's operations. These signs of corruption within the police force itself increased the difficulty of the investigation, putting Simon in an increasingly dangerous position. Despite the obstacles, Simon persisted. He knew that to expose the Sentinels, he needed more than rumors and speculation. He needed solid evidence that could withstand scrutiny in court. Each new document he analyzed seemed to bring him closer to something concrete, but the true identity of the organization's leaders remained out of reach. Meanwhile, Philip Matthews remained in prison, aware that Simon was getting closer to the truth. Philip had always known more than he had revealed about Louise's disappearance, but he chose to keep silent, hoping the truth would emerge on its own without compromising the promises and friendships he had cultivated over the years. He watched from afar, knowing that Simon's investigation might finally bring to light what had been hidden for so long. Simon Reynolds was increasingly entangled in the complexities of the Sentinel's investigation. As the case progressed, it became clear that this was not just a simple disappearance or an ordinary criminal group. The network of corruption ran deep, and the revelation that some of his own colleagues were compromised only added to the challenge. Simon decided to act with extreme caution. He kept his findings secret, fearing that any shared information might leak to the wrong people. The atmosphere in the department had become tense, with Simon working silently, reviewing files alone, and constantly on alert for potential betrayals. Trust was a luxury he could not afford. It was in this climate of distrust that Simon arranged a meeting with a reliable informant, someone outside the department with good connections in the underworld of crime. The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse, far from cameras and prying eyes, where Simon hoped to get the answers he needed to move the case forward. The informant, a man with a complicated past but known for his accuracy and valuable information, arrived punctually, looking around cautiously. He knew he was dealing with something dangerous and didn't want to be seen talking to a police investigator. "The Sentinels are more than you think, Simon," the informant began, lighting a cigarette as he spoke. "They have people everywhere, even in your team." Simon nodded, already aware of the internal betrayals, but he was hoping for more. "I need something concrete. Who's behind the Sentinels? How do they operate?" The informant took a drag from his cigarette and gave Simon a serious look. "There's a name you need to know, Logan Swanson. He's at the top, and he has a direct connection to Louise, the judge's daughter." Simon frowned. "What do you mean, direct connection? Is Louise alive?" The informant nodded. "Yes, she's alive, and she's been with Logan, but I don't know exactly how or why she got involved with him. What I do know is that Logan Swanson is a dangerous man, and Louise is caught up in something much bigger than just a disappearance." This revelation changed the entire course of the investigation for Simon. Louise was not just a victim, but a central piece in a game of power and manipulation involving dangerous figures like Logan Swanson. Philip, on the other hand, seemed to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, bearing the burden of unjust accusations while holding secrets that could reveal the whole truth. Simon returned to his office, his mind racing as he mentally reorganized all the information he had. He now knew he needed to find a way to expose Logan Swanson and understand Louise's role in all of this. To dismantle the Sentinels and clear Philip's name, Simon would have to walk a tightrope, navigating between dubious allies and traitors disguised as colleagues. Simon Reynolds felt that the investigation was reaching its climax. After weeks of intense searches, uncertain leads, and the constant risk of being betrayed by colleagues, he finally located Logan Swanson in a distant state. The operation to capture him was planned with extreme caution, away from the eyes and ears that could alert Logan and allow him to escape once more. Simon knew this was the decisive moment to uncover the truth and close the case once and for all. Simon's team moved quietly through Logan's secluded property, a large house surrounded by dense trees that seemed to conspire to hide everything that happened there. The raid was swift and precise. The police stormed in by surprise, breaking down doors and advancing through the dark rooms. Logan was found in the living room, surprised but offering no resistance. Simon knew he was close to getting the answers he was seeking, but what came next caught him completely off guard. In one of the house's bedrooms, Louise appeared alive and well. Her face was serene, despite the confusion unfolding around her. She didn't seem like a victim. On the contrary, she was calm, as if she had been expecting this moment. Simon was momentarily speechless. Louise, Judge Mary dos Santos's missing daughter, whom everyone believed had been kidnapped, was there, living with Logan Swanson under a false identity. Louise voluntarily presented herself to the police, showing no fear or remorse. When taken in for questioning, she began to explain what had really happened. Years earlier, tired of her mother's rigid control and constant judgment over her life, Louise had decided to run away. Logan Swanson, who was her boyfriend at the time, offered the perfect opportunity to escape the pressure and start anew. Together, they orchestrated her disappearance. The kidnapping had been a carefully planned hoax, and the necklace that Mary had recognized in court was not evidence of a crime, but merely a piece of a game that Louise controlled. Simon listened attentively as Louise revealed that the Sentinels organization, feared by so many and responsible for numerous disappearances, had never actually existed. It was a creation of corrupt cops who exploited the stories to justify failures and cover up their own illicit acts. With no real organization to confront, the corrupt could act freely, spreading fear and diverting attention from their own activities. Philip, the man who had always sworn innocence, was just a disposable piece in this game. He had known Louise's whereabouts from the beginning, but kept silent to protect her and Logan, even while suffering in prison for crimes he never committed. Philip's loyalty, though admirable, had put him in a situation that nearly cost him his life. With the truth finally exposed, Simon felt a mix of relief and frustration. He had unraveled a web of lies and exposed internal corruption, but he also faced the harsh reality that Louise had consciously chosen her own path without considering the consequences for those she had left behind. The revelation shook the police force and Mary's family, but also brought a necessary closure to a story marked by secrets and manipulations. The news that Louise was alive spread quickly, causing a wave of shock that swept through the courtroom, the media, and especially the heart of Judge Mary dos Santos. For Mary, what should have been an immediate relief turned into a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: anger, sadness, guilt, and a twinge of hope. Her daughter, whom she had believed lost forever, was alive. But the reality of how and why this happened was something Mary could not ignore. Determined to confront her daughter, Mary traveled to the location where Louise was being held for questioning. The journey there was long, but the thoughts running through her mind made the trip even more agonizing. Mary had always been a protective mother, perhaps too much so, but she never imagined that her attempt to protect Louise would push her toward a life of lies and flight. Now, she was about to face this painful truth. When she arrived at the interview room, Mary saw Louise through the glass, sitting calmly, waiting. The judge paused for a moment, observing her daughter with tear-filled eyes. Louise looked older, but she still had the same determined expression she had as a teenager. Mary entered the room, the heavy silence filling the space between them. Louise looked up and met her mother's gaze. There was a mix of surprise and understanding in both of their eyes, and for a moment neither knew how to begin. Finally, Mary broke the silence, her voice firm, but choked with emotion. "Why, Louise? Why did you do this?" Mary asked, trying to maintain composure, but failing to hide the tremor in her words. Louise took a deep breath before responding. "Mom, I needed freedom. I loved Logan, but you never accepted him. You always controlled me, always wanted to decide what was best for me. I couldn't take living like that anymore." Mary shook her head, trying to process what she was hearing. "So you thought running away was the solution, making everyone believe you were dead or kidnapped? Do you know what that did to me, to Philip?" Louise lowered her eyes, clearly shaken at the mention of Philip's name. "I know, Mom, and I'm sorry. I never wanted things to go this far. The necklace Philip wore, it was a gift from us, from Logan and me. It was supposed to be a symbol of our friendship, that even when apart we were still connected. Philip was dragged into this mess because of me, and I never wanted him to suffer." Louise's words hit Mary like a tidal wave of emotions. The judge had always believed she was doing the best to protect her daughter, but now, faced with the truth, she saw that perhaps her control and judgments had helped push Louise into Logan's arms and a life of lies. Mary began to question all her decisions, what she had done and what she could have done differently. "You have no idea how much I've suffered all these years, thinking you were dead or in danger," Mary said, her voice finally giving way to the weight of tears. "And Philip, I judged an innocent man. I condemned him without really listening, without understanding." Louise approached, touching her mother's trembling hand. "I know that nothing I say will change what happened, but I did what I did out of love, out of a desperate need to feel free, and I deeply regret all the harm I caused." Mary looked at her daughter, seeing in her a reflection of her own faults and hopes. The anger she felt began to dissipate, replaced by a painful understanding that both were victims of their own choices. They embraced, a heavy embrace of years of separation, misunderstandings, and regrets. Mary, still grappling with her emotions, knew that complete reconciliation would take time, but that moment was a start. For the first time, mother and daughter were truly face to face, not as judge and defendant, but as two women trying to mend the past. Mary left the room determined to correct her mistakes and fight for Philip's innocence. She knew there was much to resolve, but she also knew she was ready to face the consequences of her actions and find a way to rebuild her bond with Louise. The journey of forgiveness and redemption was just beginning, and Mary was willing to follow this path, no matter how difficult it might be. The courtroom was full again, but this time the atmosphere was different. The case of Philip Matthews, which had previously been shrouded in an aura of uncertainties and suspicions, was now seen in a new light. Thanks to Simon Reynolds' investigation and Louise's revelations, the trial had been reopened with the promise of finally delivering justice. Simon sat in the room, watching everything intently. He felt a mix of satisfaction and relief. The truth he had pursued so relentlessly was finally being acknowledged. The evidence he had gathered, testimonies, documents, and the revelations about the false Sentinels organization was now laid before the judge, dismantling the previous case against Philip. The defense attorney presented the new evidence clearly, highlighting the flaws and manipulations of the system that had led to Philip's conviction. Mary dos Santos, who had previously presided over Philip's trial, was now seated in the audience, not as a judge, but as a mother, a witness, and perhaps most importantly, someone seeking redemption. It was a new and uncomfortable role for her, but Mary knew she had a duty to fulfill. She waited anxiously for the moment when she could speak, feeling the weight of the words she had prepared. When it was her turn to testify, Mary stood up and walked to the witness stand. The silence that fell over the courtroom was almost palpable. Everyone there knew that this would be an important statement. Mary looked directly at Philip and then at the judge, taking a deep breath before beginning. "Your Honor, members of the court, and everyone present," Mary began, her voice firm but charged with emotion. "I am here today not just as someone who witnessed the justice system fail, but also as someone who failed to see the truth." Mary continued, admitting her mistake in not thoroughly investigating Philip's claims and allowing her own fears and pains to blind her to what really mattered, the pursuit of impartial justice. She spoke about Louise, the pressures and the control she had imposed on her daughter, and how those decisions had contributed to the ensuing chaos. "Philip Matthews is an innocent man," Mary declared, her voice cracking. "He was dragged into this situation by decisions that I, in part, helped perpetuate. I ask forgiveness from him, from this court, and from all those who suffered from the injustice that persisted for so long." The room remained silent as Mary returned to her seat. It was rare to see such a respected figure publicly admit her mistakes, and the impact of her words was evident on the faces of those present. Philip, sitting on the defendant's bench, looked emotional but serene. He knew that the truth was finally being heard. With the new evidence presented and Mary's sincere testimony, the judge did not take long to reach his decision. Philip Matthews was declared innocent of all charges, and the accusations against him were officially dropped. The room erupted in murmurs and subdued applause as Philip breathed a sigh of relief, feeling the weight of years of injustice beginning to lift from his shoulders. Meanwhile, Simon's work was beginning to bear fruit beyond the courtroom. The corrupt police system that had allowed the Sentinels to become a convenient myth to justify disappearances was being dismantled. Internal investigations were launched, and the officers involved began to be identified and held accountable. Simon, who had risked so much to expose the truth, was publicly praised for his determination and integrity, showing that there were still those in the police force willing to fight for what was right. At the end of the hearing, Philip approached Mary. There were no immediate words between them, but the look they exchanged said much more than any speech. It was a look of mutual understanding, acknowledgement of mistakes, and a silent promise to move forward without grudges. Mary, Philip, and Simon left the courtroom under a clear sky, the weight of the truth finally revealed, bringing a sense of peace. Although there was still much to repair and many steps to take, the first major move to restore justice had been made. For Mary, it was the beginning of a long path of forgiveness, not just for Philip and Louise, but also for herself. Simon, watching everything closely, felt satisfied with how things had unfolded. He knew that the fight for justice was ongoing, but at that moment he could breathe a little easier, knowing that he had done his part to correct a wrong that had cost so much to so many people. The journey was far from over, but the first and most important victory had been achieved. The soft light of late afternoon bathed the house where Mary, Louise, and Logan were gathered. It was the first time in many years that the family was complete, albeit under unexpected circumstances. The tension and pain of recent days were beginning to give way to a hesitant calm as everyone tried to find their place amid the wreckage of the past. Mary watched Louise, now by Logan's side, with a new perspective. She saw a woman who, despite everything, had fought for her freedom and her love, even if her choices had caused pain. Mary felt she finally understood Louise's motives. It was not just rebellion or disdain for the rules, but a deep desire to live her own life away from the restraints that Mary had unknowingly placed on her. Sitting around the table, Mary, Louise, and Logan talked about the future. There was much to rebuild, many conversations to be had, but the most important thing was that they were willing to try. Louise, with a slight smile, held Logan's hand, and for the first time, Mary did not see this as a challenge to her authority, but as a symbol of the love that had kept Louise strong through so many years of flight and uncertainty. "I know it won't be easy," Mary said, breaking the silence with a soft voice. "But I want to try. I want to be present. I want to support you, and I want to meet my grandchild with an open heart." Louise smiled, squeezing her mother's hand affectionately. "Thank you, Mum. That means a lot to us. I know we've made difficult choices, but we're ready to start over, all of us." Logan, who had been the pivot of so much discord between Louise and Mary, looked at the judge with an expression of respect and sincerity. "I've always wanted the best for Louise, Mrs. Mary. I never wanted to take her away from you. Now, I just want us to move forward as a family, despite all the differences." Mary nodded, feeling a relief she didn't know she needed. Acceptance was a small step, but for Mary, it represented an opening for forgiveness and for the love that had long been buried under the weight of fear and pride. With the impending arrival of Louise's baby, there was a sense of renewal in the air. They decided they would return to the city where it all began, ready to face the future with their eyes on the present and the lessons of the past well learned. Mary's old house would be renovated, not just physically, but also as a home that would now embrace all the changes that come with time. Philip, although not present at this reunion, was part of this new phase. He had moved to a quiet place, far from the confusion that had dominated his life for so long. Still, he kept in touch with Louise and Logan, strengthening the bonds of friendship that had never really broken, just hidden by the turmoil. As the sun set on the horizon, bathing the city in shades of gold, Mary, Louise, and Logan contemplated the landscape, each with their thoughts, but all connected by an invisible thread of hope. The past could not be changed, but the future was open, and they were determined to fill it with new moments, new smiles, and above all, with the peace they had so long sought. For Mary, Louise, and Logan, this was the beginning of a new journey. The scars of the past remained, but now they were part of a story that had strengthened them. They were ready to build a life in which the mistakes of the past would serve only as reminders of the path they did not want to follow again. With the arrival of the baby, the family anticipated a future full of challenges, but also joys. And together, they knew they could overcome any obstacle as long as they remained united. As the night fell, illuminated by the stars, there was a quiet certainty that finally they were all where they needed to be, together, ready to start over. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.